to quit service under circumstances that perhaps led him to take moral responsibility of the kind of incidents that we have seen in the Navy?
Yeah, first thing that I would like to say that I'm shocked that Admiral Joshi has decided to resign. He need not have done that, but in doing so, I think he has set a great example of, taking on the responsibility of the people down below for perhaps it may be their mistake. But as the head of the service, for him to resign, first ever, service chief in India to do this kind of thing. I think it's an absolutely great example, and he's been a friend for many years, and hats off to him. You need a lot of moral courage and character, to do this kind of a thing.
Okay, we also have Sandeep in the studio with us and Shivarur, who's broken the story and getting us more inputs. Sandeep, let me ask you. Earlier today, we were getting, an inkling from former Navy chiefs that perhaps this has been because of the largely old vessels that the Indian Navy has, and the government is as much to be blamed. On the other hand, we also saw or got reports that A.K. Antony was extremely unhappy with what had happened. So what really transpired? What is the sense that you're getting?
Well, my sense is that the Navy chief was given an option to quit by the government, and if you've noticed in the last year, there's been a spate of accidents, and it's not just the accidents, but it's the Navy's inability to realize that there was this very serious problem. If you remember his press conference in December of last year, where he said that they didn't have a problem with the number of accidents that were there, and their safety record was the same as any other Navy in the world. I mean, my question to him would be that which other Navy in the world has actually lost 4 warships in peacetime in a decade? I'm not talking of those minor accidents and collisions. Since 2004, the Navy has been losing 1 warship at the rate of every 3 years. 1 warship every 3 years. It's lost 1 submarine. As you know, last year it exploded and sank in harbor. This is not a submarine that's out on patrol. It sank alongside, which is probably never happened in the history of the world. You've lost a frigate to a collision. You've lost 2 missile corvettes, and now you have an emergency like this, which submariners are telling me that freon gas has never been discharged in an Indian submarine. That just shows how catastrophic this fire was. And the other question is that there is a very deep-seated rot. There is a deep-rooted rot within the submarine arm. It's been brewing for the last couple of years. It's gone unnoticed. There are accusations of nepotism within the submarine arm, and a whole lot of let's say undeserving officers have been promoted. There's a lot of resentment within the arm, and why didn't the 3 senior-most submarine arm officers resign? I mean, instead of the Navy chief, it should have been the flag officer submarine.
Which is what I want to ask Shivarur. With the Navy chief resigning, are we going to see any change where the problem really lies, or does accountability start from the top? Should other measures also be taken?
Well, it's an extremely troubling phase. This transition phase is going to be extremely troubling. Now, what the Ministry of Defence has done, Maruk, is like Sandeep just pointed out, given Admiral Joshi, the option to resign, and given, the amount of pressure that has been brought to bear between the MOD and the Navy in the last 6 to 7 months especially, but also beyond that, it clearly came to a point where the Admiral didn't have a choice. But what becomes crucial at this time is how is the MOD going to, take the next few steps? There are at least 10 or 11 parallel boards of inquiry currently on. There are severe questions over training and procedural issues. Like Sandeep pointed out, there are issues that are, intangibles like nepotism that will have to be gone into. So apart from these 12 boards of inquiry, that are going to proceed now without a person at the helm, even though the Vice Chief of the Naval Staff will be the interim Navy Chief until a new Chief of Naval Staff is appointed. There's going to be a leadership issue. How is the Ministry of Defence actually going to fill that void? There are going to be extreme and grave moral issues as far as the Navy is concerned. Because remember, for those of us who are outside uniform, Maruk, it's difficult to imagine the kind of status that a service chief actually has for men and women in uniform. So for a chief to actually take moral responsibility and resign is going to have have an enormous impact on, on the emotions, the sentiment, and the minds of the men and women in the Indian Navy at this point of time. But work has to be done. So right now, the Ministry of Defence's priority will have to be to get to the bottom of each of those incidents. Issues like Sandeep just pointed out.
Okay.
There are nepotism issues, also discipline
there.
And command and control.
Yeah, Admiral Raza Menon on the phone line with us. Admiral Menon, earlier in the day you said that this was clearly because of the state of the ships and the Navy at this point. But did you expect such an unprecedented step by the Navy Chief?
Not in the least. Not because I'm surprised at the Navy Chief, because he is a man of very high conduct, and he lives a severe and very austere life. So I'm not surprised that he has resigned. But one has completely forgotten these standards of public conduct in the welter of low standards exhibited in public life by people generally in the last 3 or 4 decades. For that reason, I am a little surprised. I thought if the government had the slightest decency, it would have turned down the resignation of the Navy Chief. But of course, the government doesn't take decisions based on morality; it's based on public expediency.
But Admiral Menon, there's one point of view that with the kind of rot that we were seeing in the Navy, with the systematic, increasing level of incidents, mishaps as they have been called, that were happening, clearly somebody had to take responsibility.
Yeah, but there is no incident that occurs in the Navy where responsibility is not fixed. It's not like a civil case, where the cases drag on for 15 years and 20 years. Responsibility is fixed within a month or 2 of the incident occurring. And the boards of inquiry casts their net very wide, and they fix the responsibility not only on people who are directly responsible, but even on people who had a peripheral responsibility. But all this doesn't come out in the press. But the Ministry of Defense should have known it. But then the Ministry of Defense has always exhibited an extremely low standard of public conduct.
Admiral Menon, this is Shiv Arur, sir. Thanks for joining us this evening. Are you suggesting, Admiral Menon, that the Navy Chief has perhaps been made at some level a scapegoat in this entire issue, given the relentless kind of negative publicity we've seen over the last 6 months?
Completely. There's no question that he's been made a scapegoat. For instance, the movement of the submarine where it touched bottom, it was a clear case of staff responsibility for not seeing that the harbor is dredged. When a commanding officer's submarine is moved by tugs, he normally expects that he'll be moved from one berth to another across water where there is enough water. That is a staff responsibility. That's not the Chief of Naval Staff's responsibility.
But as the commander of the naval forces, he had to take responsibility, Raza Menon.
Yeah, but this is like saying that, once upon a time, 25, 30, 40 years ago, the railway minister used to resign when there was a train accident. But those standards of public behavior are long gone. I mean, people are completely unused.
But Admiral Menon, 12 incidents in 12 months.
Yes.
12 incidents in 12 months. Does that not raise alarm bells?
In the least, because some of those 12 incidents are completely frivolous. Because the cases like a ship coming alongside, in a hard alongside, these happen all the time. There is nothing so desperate about it. And the last thing you really want to do is to curb the dash of commanding officers who handle their ships with a certain amount of flair and elan. That's all that is being achieved. That an air of caution and watching your back all the time. That kind of atmosphere is being brought into the Navy.